At this point in installation, you've removed everything you need to get access to the sides of the frame. Mask is off, fender is off, unclipped all the wiring, pulled out of the way. We've even unclipped this side. And you're gonna put the frame plates on first. In this case, you're gonna grab all of the 8mm bolts that we included. There are two upper spacers, we call them torque spacers. They're at the upper part of the frame plates here. This is the one for if you're not running a damper on an EXC or XC bike. This one has a little notch out of it. It has more of a notch to clear a tower if you have a damper installed on the bike. This bike has a damper, so we're going with this one. The top two 8mm bolts, they're opposing, so you put a nut and the head are on opposite sides. This just allows you to possibly get a socket on there or a wrench on there a little easier. You're not fighting the two hexes on one side because they are very close together. The lower 8mm bolt has a metal spacer. We're including two of these, a 61mm and a 63mm spacer. Depending on how the welds are on the frames, we're seeing a lot of variance, I mean, all the way back from 2008, when those bikes, when we started making rally kits for those, we'd see different widths on the welds. Just it's all different. So the idea of these frame plates is not only these 8mm bolts and all of these 6mm are taking all of that force and that coming down from the weight of the fairing and hitting bikes and whoops or G-outs or whatever it is. These bolts are doing the majority of the work, but we're also, the reason we have these spacers and these, what we're calling torque plates, is so you have a torque stop, because you're actually going to be bending these plates and pinching around the frame. So you want to bend them in probably at least a couple millimeters at the bottom, and it's actually like hugging and pinching around the frame. That's the goal of this and as designed. When you first install this guy on here, I like to start with the 3 8mm again, and I also throw in, you don't have to put the nuts on, but I also put on a couple of the 6mm head bolts on the front, and that's just going to help me align this. You want these two plates parallel on either side. It's going to feel a little loose at first, that's fine. When I start to locate it, you'll see we spent a lot of time getting and centering around these posts for your voltage regulator, the key lock on these EXC bikes, and also the charcoal canister tubes here. There's an oval here because on this side, on the left side of the bike, they've mounted it back a little bit. On the right side, they mounted it forward a little bit. So we just put a slot in here, so that's as designed. You see a little farther back and a little farther forward on either side. Okay, next step. Once you have these aligned pretty nice and bolts are parallel, we're snug against the frame. So you don't want gaps between the bolts and the frame. They should be all touching that frame. So snug these up, get out, it's a 6mm Allen, 13mm wrench or socket. Wrench are easier to get on here. Snug them up until the bolt is flush with the nut. It's going to give you an idea here. In this case, you see the spacer that we have for the upper spacer, our torque spacer. Still have, it's about 3mm gap here. That is great. 3mm gap on one side, I should clarify. That is great. So that's going to bring that pinch in and hug this frame about 3mm. Where we're seeing some pretty different variance between the 2017 and newer frames, that is this gusset here that's wrapped around the frame. Try to get this camera in a little better. The welds here that come down through here vary a lot and change the overall frame width a lot on this bike. By a lot, I mean anywhere from 3 to 4mm. We've seen a difference on that, depending if they have a big old goober on here or if it's a clean weld. Okay, here's one of our upper towers as assembled for the adventure kits. We have our top dash, LEDs are already installed, USBs hooked up through the LED power. We prep the grommets here ready for the speedometer bracket here. So we're gonna relocate, key relocation, and it'll ship with these bolts and the spacers already assembled on here, hand tight. So what we're gonna do is take all of these off before we install the tower. Take a couple of the 6mm bolts out of the upper tower. Grab what I like to grab and start with the left side spacer. Tell that by, this is the cutout for the voltage regulator. There's also notches here that are going to match the notch tower, the upper notch on the tower. So these, there are a left and a right. So I just start with 2 of the bolts, put one in and just expose a couple threads. I'll put in the other here, expose a couple threads to the inside. Get the wiring out of the way. And now we've got a clear space runway for this. Grab the whole tower. Come in here. Start with the top. And feed it through the bottom. Sometimes that little spacer might fall out, which it did, but I got it back here. And just start at that tower. Might need a wrench, but should get most of the way through. There we go. And push that a little too far in. Bring them out about this because we're gonna have to go to the other side, put the spacer in, and then we'll hand tighten the nuts. Okay, on this side, I've pushed through the top and the bottom 6mm bolts. Let's expose this a bit. Just those are a few threads exposed. It's going to help when we put the spacer on this side. It's got something to grab and sit on so it doesn't fall through. On the right side, this spacer does not have the notch in the middle for the voltage regulator, but it does have a notch on the top. You want it top and facing backward on the bike. So I'm going to tilt this up a bit. I'm going to slide the spacer on, line it up, and to help me get it going, you could use a 5mm Allen wrench, or in this case, I've put a socket on the impact here and a small impact. I'm going to go all the way to lock so I have room on the other side. I'm not going to scrape my fork tubes. And we're going to, this is a point where you kind of leverage a bit, line up the holes, and just get this first guy through. Okay, got that in there, and now I can go on this side. Gonna pull the tower up, get it in place, right on through. Now I could start a bolt. Continue this for the rest of the bolts. All right, we've got all the 6mm and the 8mm bolts snug on there. We want to do just a final align. You should be able to grab this and without, you're not gonna feel a clunk, you're not gonna feel any sloppiness at this point because everything's kind of snugged in. Not final tighten, but snugged in. And also you want to aim, or I should say align straight down this frame and look back to the center point of the rear fender. You are able to move this just a couple degrees left to right at this point when you're still snug. Get this guy aligned and then do final tighten. So on the 6mm bolts at the head tube, we're going to final tighten those to 15 Newton meters or 11 pounds. The 8mm in the back and the lower part is 17 Newton meters, 12 foot-pounds. That also equates to, you're gonna see 1 to 1.5 threads exposed. This one down here, depending again on the eighths, depending on how bulky the welds are. You might see 2, you might see 1 thread exposed at the max 2. Okay, at this point, we're going to reinstall the voltage regulator. Now this is one from the factory. There's no thread locker. Rally racing, adventure riding, all this stuff, I just always thread lock everything. You'll even see there's thread locker on the nylock, I should say the bolts that are, even though we have nylock, we're also thread locking on here. We love this stuff here. It's called Vibratite. It's included with your kit. And it says it reuses up to 5 times. You could adjust or retighten, loosen and retighten up to 5 times. I don't touch that. We reapply every time. It cures in 10 to 30 minutes. The longer you let it cure, the better. So this would be a good opportunity to go ahead and apply some of the VC3 Vibrotite thread mate to the bolts. At this point, we have the majority of the mechanical done. We're going to move on to wiring. Install your speedo. Use the T20 Torx that you used to remove it. Get it in place. Get the wiring there. Now, here's one of the fun parts and the part I enjoy about this design that we've worked on for a while. Revising since basically 2011 when I've started working on these rally kits, is to be able to put in features that, most of the time on these kits, what you're going to see is the wiring. So one of the thoughts I had was be able to access and get to a lot of the wiring. Grab your 4mm Allen and remove both sides again, back these out to this point, and remove these 6mm bolts, and just get them out of what this is called the mid plate or the offset block. So this is our lower frame, mid block, upper frame, and then we have these offset blocks because the mid frame is designed to be in as far as we can and not limit our steering radius. And then this outer block is to help with more room for wiring, which has always been a caveat and a problem with my older designs, is I wanted more room here to be able to deal with wiring. So when we back out all 8 of the 6mm bolts and then the upper 4mm bolts, basically we allow us to tilt this whole guy down and give us access to basically this mid block for the wiring, which is huge. We're going to take basically the handlebar controls, come in through the top here. We're going to start routing those down. And then all the wiring that's on the, coming up the right side of the frame, we're going to route under, and we have the access hole here. We're going to wire those, or route those wires through here. We do not include step-by-step instructions for the wiring. Some people have modified their EXE or FE bikes, maybe purged out some of the unnecessaries. We also don't have support for turn signals at this time, but we'll give you some tips on how to tuck that away until later. But again, some guidelines. We took this guy here with the largest bulk with the 6 circuit connector from the right side of the bike, fished that up through, got these plugs up in here and ready. The other bundle that includes some of the switches on the right hand side, the speedo 3 circuit wires, and then there's also the key, the square 4, which is the key plug. That's not gonna go through the bottom like I indicated earlier. This guy, I think, at least for this bike that we're working on, we're gonna go up, and some of the plugs are gonna stay outside the mid block, some are gonna go through. So the key's obviously gonna go through. This is a good time to install the extensions that we provided with some of these wires coming in. So there's a 3 circuit bundle with going to the speedo. We include extensions for that. Go ahead and fish that guy through. And then for the right side, there's a 2 circuit Molex style plug. We include an extension for that. This is a good time to put that on and fish that through as well. And then there we go. This is also a good time to install the key. We include a spacer that you're going to want to put on the key at this point. Has a flat on there. It's pretty obvious how to put it on. So put the little spacer on, go through the inside of the tower, and then you'll attach and re-screw back on the this threaded bezel. Now this guy, very fine thread. Just make sure you're not cross-threading this guy when you put it on. Just a little tip, because it's pretty fine threads for the diameter, but relatively easy install.